Hello, my name is Mike Lorino, and I am the designer of Imperial Elegy, published by VUCA Simulation and coming in November of 2025, hopefully, is the plan. So, Imperial Elegy is a game that simulates the lead up to and then outbreak of the First World War, or in game terms, the Great War. It's a war that doesn't need to happen, but it can happen over the course of the game. And depending on players' actions, they can encourage or discourage the war from breaking out. This video is an introduction to the game, going over basic components and basic things about the game, what the players are, and the map, and so on, and in the cards. There will be a follow-up video where I play through a turn of the game using IE's bot system. But for now, let's just get into the basic components and what we're looking at. So here we have the map. The map is set up for the campaign scenario. And we're not actually going to start with the map. Instead, we're going to start with each player's display. And we're going to start with the French player display. Because here, we're going to branch out and start to explain things in order and then relate to the map when that comes up. So everything below here in this section is not part of the physical player display. That's just something our awesome Vassal module designer Kevin threw in. So when we're talking about the player display, we're really referring to everything up here. Let's make this a little bit bigger so we can get everything in one shot. So let's start here. So we have France, which is the title of the power we're playing. FR is France abbreviated. You'll see FR a lot in the game. So for example, FR is right there. Then we have the French flag, etc. So our first track on our player aid is stability. Stability is sort of like, well, how stable your country is. The higher it is, you get benefits. The lower it is, you get consequences. When you get to the Great War, stability, if you get to the Great War, stability is kind of like your country's health. Whenever you lose a space, your stability goes down. And if you ever reach 0, your country collapses and you immediately lose. There actually is player elimination in the game, but only at the end in the Great War. So stability is very important, and you want to get your stability up to get more health, essentially, for the Great War, but also, so if you get to 6, you get a +1 card bonus, which is pretty nice. The next is manpower. Manpower designates how many peacetime armies you can have on the map, or mechanically how many standing armies you can have on the map. So if we go to the map here, we can see that the French have 4 standing armies in France. The 1st, 4th, 2nd, and 3rd armies. In Champagne, Alsace-Lorraine, Paris, and then Provence, respectively. So there are 2 different types of armies, standing and reserve. Reserve armies are designated here, and they have a slight little R in their bottom left-hand corner. Reserve armies and standing armies fight basically the same, but how many standing and reserve armies will change depending on certain tracks. But essentially, the French manpower is 4. They can have 4 standing armies during peacetime. Manpower is also useful for building more armies when you get to the Great War, but then you're going to be depleting manpower as you build more armies. Our third track here is industry, which is really how many cards you can get, but also how many extra points you get to spend during wartime in normal wars, and how many points you get to spend per turn, essentially during a turn in the Great War. So increasing your industry gives you more cards. It gives you more points to spend in wartime. It also increases your reserve army limit. Because your reserve army limit, if we look over here, is equal to your manpower or your industry, whichever is lower. So currently the French reserve army limit is 1. They can have 1 reserve army. Reserve armies essentially can only be deployed during wartime, and the more reserve armies, the better. Sometimes I see playtesters neglecting industry. If you do this and it comes to a Great War, you're probably going to lose. Our next track is territorial keys. This indicates how many keys we control that can retrace an overland supply route to the capital, which in this case is Paris. So for a second, let's actually clear the pieces off the board. We can see we control 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That can all trace a line of supply back to Paris overland. That is why we are at 9 territorial keys. Territorial keys, we can also see, gives us our manpower of 4, which is why we're at 4 manpower. Then you'll see colonial keys over here. Now, colonial keys indicate how many keys you have that are colonial spaces. A colonial key is a space, by the way, I forgot to mention this. Keys are squares. These circles are territories. I'll explain them more later. Colonial keys are the opposite. They cannot be traced back to your capital over land. So if we're French and we take control of Algeria here, that would count as a colonial key. We currently don't control Algeria at the start of the game because there's a pacification marker there indicating that there's some sort of local conflict there, and we're going to have to pacify Algeria before we control it. You'll also notice that we have an influence marker down here in West Africa. This is a stepping stone to control, but we don't control West Africa yet because the marker isn't a control marker. You'll see here, if we click on this influence marker and flip it, it goes to control. So on the front side is influence, and then on the back side is control. Okay. You'll also notice there's a diplomacy marker up here. Diplomacy markers are sort of like the counterpart to influence markers, except you place diplomacy markers when you're interacting with a minor power. You know it's a minor power because it has the flag in it and it's a purple space. There are other situations where it can be a minor power, but in this case, we know this is a minor power. It has a flag, therefore we put a diplomacy marker on it. Diplomacy, by the way, is a stepping stone to being an ally. That's a mistake. That should be a French ally marker. We'll fix that. I promise that in the actual game, the components are correct. But nonetheless. You'll notice that there are no flags, for example, in Sudan or Cameroon or Nigeria. These are provinces that don't have minor powers. In game terms, these are uncontrolled spaces. In reality, there were local tribes there, but for game purposes and mechanically speaking, they're uncontrolled spaces. Okay, now if we move over to this section of our player aid, we have national characteristics. Imperial Elegy is a very asymmetrical game. So all of these are unique powers to France. And if we go through the other player displays, you'll notice that tons of powers have unique abilities that only they have and special rules. The Austrians have a ton, mostly pertaining to all of the various nationalities in their empire that don't have rights yet. As one of my friends in playtesting put it, they're just a trench coat with nationalities stacked on top. But here we have the Russians and then the Ottomans. And again, notice that we have different national characteristics. But let's go back to the French. So the French can either be the Third Republic or the Second French Empire, and this will change what special ability they have. They start the game as the Third Republic. They have the Zouaves, which are an elite unit, which are currently deployed in Algeria. And then they have this cultural symbol ability, where they accrue City of Light points, which can gain them cards over the course of the game, and possibly victory points. So that's essentially what we have for the player display, and I really do think it's the best place to start when you're learning your faction. So let's jump over to the French hand for a second and try to see what cards we have to get into the meat of the game. Because IE is a card-driven game, or a CDG, where on your impulse you're going to play a card to conduct actions. So I've already drawn all the cards for all the players. And the French start the campaign game with 3 cards plus 1 home card. I've selected City of Light here, but the French could have selected their second home card. It's the phrase from the Marseillaise, Aux armes citoyen. I know I'm mispronouncing that. I apologize to everyone who's listening this who is French. I apologize. But there are a couple key features to a card. You'll notice in this, the Decline of the Qing card, we have a CP value here. We have the bot box, which indicates if the card was played by a bot, if you're playing with bots, whether or not the faction will play it. If you're not playing with bots, you can completely disregard the bot box. We have the title, we have the event, and then we have the prerequisites down here. So when you're playing a card, you have 2 options. You can either play it for its event or for its point value. People who have played CDGs before will find this formula very familiar. So if I play Decline of the Qing on my impulse as the French, I can either trigger the event, which it is playable by me. If we look at the bottom, it's playable by the British, the French, the Russians, or Germans if Germany is unified, which is a mechanic in the game. And it will basically give us control over a space in Qing China. If we actually jump over to Qing China, this is an interesting rule. Notice China has these Qing flags in them. That indicates that you cannot just directly colonize it. The only way to get into Qing China is through the play of certain event cards, like the Decline of the Qing, for example, which demonstrate the weakening of the Qing government. Alternatively, I could play this card for points. And when you play a card for points, you, if this will load, you will play it for one of these actions. There are a lot of actions in IE. I am not going to go over all of them in detail. I'm just going to give you a brief overview. Recruitment, build units, land units. Naval movement, move your fleets. Build fleets. Place a diplomacy or an influence marker once per impulse. Remove a diplomacy or influence marker. Gain an alliance with a minor power. Remember, you must have diplomacy before you do that. Remove a minor power alliance. Major power influence track. That is this, where you're influencing a major power on this track over here. And this will affect the alliance table down at the bottom over here. So if you want to try to put another player in an alliance, you probably want to take that kind of action. It's a game about World War I. The alliance system is pretty important. Then we have redeployment, move all your units, declare war, fight a land battle, expeditionary force, pacification, construct fort, CP chain, and then industrialize. Again, like I said, I'm not going to go through all the actions. I'll explain those more if you watch the second video when we do those actions in the solo playthrough. So that's what you can do when you spend your points. You could either do one of these actions, you do one of the actions, or like I said, you also have the option to play the card for its event. So let's put that back into the French hand. So that's essentially a good overview of what cards are, but there are different types of cards. For example, Secret Treaty here is a response card, as signified by the orange coloring and the R here. And it tells you when you can play it at the bottom. Play during the alliance step of a war in which you are participating. So you play this during the alliance step, and you immediately flip an alliance marker. That you basically replace one of your opponent's alliance markers with one of your ally markers, which is just fun. But let's look at some of the other hands to see if other different types of cards. So here, if we look at the German, well, at this point, Prussian hand, what we'll notice is they have this M symbol and this blue background. This is a mandatory event. These cards, when you play them, the event always triggers and you get the points. The event will trigger first. This will decrease world tension and will be removed from the game after turn 5, the Concert of Europe. And if we go down to the bottom of the board here, we'll see this world tension track. When world tension reaches 5, you'll roll on the crisis table to see if the Great War starts. But it should take a while to reach 5. It shouldn't immediately jump to 5. There are mostly cards that push it up. Okay. Then, I believe in the Russian hand, nope. In the Ottoman hand, we have the Siege Guns card. This is a combat card. Again, it tells you when you can play it at the bottom. And you play it essentially during a battle against an enemy fort. You'll also notice next to the 2, the small little card symbol there, which says draw. It also says it in the event. You draw another card if you play this card for its event, not for CP. There are other cards, such as, oh, here's one. There are other cards, such as the South German Confederation, an ahistorical card, but an interesting event nonetheless, in which if you play it for its event, it's removed from the game. Notice the black card symbol above the CP value. Okay. So those are the 4 different types of cards. You have basic cards, response cards, combat cards, and mandatory events. Like I said, there are also home cards. Home cards are powerful cards. Every power has 2 of them, and it basically guarantees each player access to a powerful card every turn. And they're quite thematic, such as this one, the Russo-Turkish Wars, which basically means that the Russians are going to attack the Ottomans, which happened a lot historically. So, Those are the cards. Let's talk a little bit about the map and then units and so on and so forth. So we've already mentioned how these squares are keys. And then these square units are armies. Armies have 2 steps at 2 each step equates essentially to a firepower in combat. So this first army by itself here has 2 strength. If it's reduced, it has 1 strength. The French also should have an elite corps in Paris, which I forgot to put down. And that's useful because our next unit is the elite corps. Notice the circular unit. One of the great things VUCA did when publishing this game is they worked with me on the shapes of the counters to make them easily distinguishable in the physical copy just by looking at the stack. You're not going to have to pick up units and to decide which one is what. A big square is an army. A circle is an elite corps. Forts are hexagons, and you'll notice the dash numbers on the side of the fort indicate its strength. So if we click on this fort and improve it, notice the 2 dashes. Even when it's covered with an army, you can still kind of see that that's a 2 strength fort. Let's reduce the fort at Verdun back down to level 1. Oh, don't want to move both of them. The third type of unit is an expeditionary force. They're smaller squares. Notice again, they're smaller. So again, you'll be able to distinguish the expeditionary force from the stack just by glancing at it. Then we have naval units. Naval units also have 2 steps like armies. Same thing, 2 strength at full, and then 1 strength at half. There are also dreadnoughts, which are super powerful naval units, which have 3 strength at full and then 2 strength at reduced, which are pretty good. EFs down here, these expeditionary forces, do not have steps. If they take a hit, they're basically eliminated. Okay, those are the units. We'll notice that there are lines between the spaces. This is a point-to-point movement game. Solid black lines, or gray, are clear connections, and basically you can move through them no problem. Dashed lines are difficult connections, harder to attack across and harder to move across. Red lines are severe connections. These lines indicate that they're difficult to move across, and it's difficult for armies to support from them. Essentially, in combat, units adjacent to the fight can provide supporting firepower, but armies can never provide supporting firepower across red lines or severe connections. There are 2 other types of lines. The first one are these dashed red lines. These simply indicate that you're moving to or from the main map. So if we're starting in Tsaritsyn, if we have the 4th Army here, the reduced 4th Army, we want to move to the Urals, we would go along this, and we would pop out right here. That's all that means is you're moving to a new map. Notice the connecting space and the diamond, and then the square down here, and these are connected. The highlighted in yellow indicates that space is a Trans-Siberian Railroad space, which is a Russian special rule. Okay. Circular spaces are territories. They don't give you the same bonuses as keys, but they're important for tracing supply lines and moving through, etc. You'll notice next to Prussia here, there's an anchor. That indicates a port space. The ports are connected to their matching naval box depending on the color. So here this black port is connected to the Baltic Sea blocks, but you'll notice this blue port is connected to the North Atlantic. And so on with the Western Med, and etc., etc. Some ports have two symbols, so Gibraltar here is connected to both the North Atlantic and the Western Mediterranean. Gibraltar, you'll also notice, is a triangle. This is a naval-based space. Naval bases are important for power projection, and also armies can never move into them because they're quite small. Fleets and expeditionary forces can go into naval bases, though. You'll also notice that these naval boxes have this yellow or golden highlight and this yellow anchor. This indicates that these are European waters boxes. Essentially, when you're moving through European waters, it's faster than when you're moving not in European waters, such as here with the South Atlantic box. Notice the one movement point symbol on this. So it costs 1 full movement point to move from the South Atlantic up to the North Atlantic. But if you're in European waters, it costs 1 movement point to move anywhere in European waters. So it's just easier to move around. And again, that's to measure the scale. Because moving all the way, for example, from the Indian Ocean to the Pacific takes a long time, whereas moving from the Eastern Med to the North Atlantic would take arguably the same amount of time. Okay. Those are some of the basic overviews, but let's talk about our tracks down here, and then we get to talk about flashpoints. But first, let's talk about the tracks. So we have the turn track, relatively simple. It indicates the turn at which we're on. You'll also notice this symbol and this symbol. This symbol means we're adding new cards to the deck. This symbol means we're drawing NGs or national goals. These are fun. So in the Vassal module, you can only draw cards when you're assigned to a player. So if we draw, each player has 8 national goal cards. These are unique for each player. Some of them are repeats, such as Peace in Our Time. Everybody has that card. Over the course of the game, you're going to acquire 3 of these cards. Essentially, on every odd turn except turn 7, you draw 3 and you pick 1. And these are your victory points for the game. You'll notice some of these have an asterisk. These are ranked victory conditions. Essentially, for this one, for example, you're competing to have the highest stability. So first place gains 3, second place gains 2 VPs, third place gains 1. There are no tiebreakers. If we both have 6 stability, we're both gaining 3 victory points. But that means we're going to skip second place, and you can read the card. So each player has 4 ranked objectives. Oh, the Austrians actually are special. They have 9 objectives, but this one is only used in certain scenarios and not used in the campaign game, so we can just put that to the side. So they have these 8 objectives. 1, 2, 3, 4 of them are ranked, and the other 4 are what's called achievement national goals. If you do the thing, you get the points. Every player has one big 4-point national goal, which are harder, but are worth more. So these are the Austrian national goals. Let's return these to the deck. Okay. This is the Great War turn track. Once you get to the Great War, if one breaks out, you use this. And on the first turn, on turn 0, there are no trenches. But then after the first year of the Great War comes, there are trenches and things get quite sloggy. Okay. Down here at the bottom, we have the flashpoint track. This is a very cool function in the game wherein you're competing over flashpoints, and if you could dominate the flashpoint, then you get a card bonus usually, except for power projection, which we'll explain that one last. So if I control Italy, for example, I need 4 keys in Italy to control it. If we flip this, I get a +1 card. You notice these lighter color ones, you get half of a card. But if we jump over to Italy for a second, there are only 5 keys in Italy. We know these are the Italian flashpoint because they have the Italy flag down here. Most flashpoints will be in this hashed area, like the Balkans, and they all have this dot next to them. But Italy and Germany are special in that the Germans and the Italian flashpoints have this little flag, which also indicate that they're unification spaces, which I'm not going to cover right now. So if you control 4 of these spaces, you're going to get an extra card. Now, importantly, and this is very important, for the purposes of flashpoints, alliances with minor powers count as control. So if the French were to ally the Piedmontese, they would count that space as controlled for the purposes of controlling the Italian flashpoint. And wars of conquest are pretty risky, so getting allies is a good way to control flashpoints. And if we go down the line here, we'll see that if you want Qing, China, and Japan as the flashpoint, you want 3 keys. Germany, you need 8. Africa, 5, but you need Africa is the most keys, but a minimum of 5. Balkan, the most keys, etc., etc. Power projection is different. If you control power projection, you don't get a card bonus, or there's a card that can give you a card bonus. You get an extra die roll modifier in your initiative roll, and you count power projection by projecting power into essentially C zones. So the maximum power projection you can have in each C box is 2, 1 for a port space, +1 if you have a naval base. So if we check down here, the British have 8 power projection, which is a lot. They get 2 for the North Atlantic. They have a port in the North Atlantic plus Gibraltar, which is a naval base, so they have 2 power projection. If we look at the Western Mediterranean, the British only have 1 port in here. They have Gibraltar and Malta, but they don't have a port plus a naval base. They need to have a normal space plus a naval base to get an extra power projection. So they only get 1 from the Western Med. In the South Atlantic, they only get 1 because they only have South Africa, so they're up to 4. In the Indian Ocean, they have 1 port but no naval base, so they're up to 5. The Pacific, they have Singapore and Hong Kong, which is 2, so they're up to 7. And then Australia and New Zealand is a port in the South and Central Pacific, so they're up to 8 power projection, which is how you track power projection. Essentially, if the power projection card comes up, dominating the power projection flashpoint gives you a card. It's a mandatory event. But otherwise, it basically gives you extra modifier on industrialization, which gives a strong incentive for the Russians to go after it because it's harder for them to industrialize. Okay, so that's most of the stuff in the game. I realize I didn't fully explain units. Like, for example, elite corps need to be with an army, and they basically give a +1 die roll modifier. They get worse as the game goes on, and better technology comes out, like machine guns on hydraulic recoil, and then they kind of automatically die. But, that happens. Expeditionary forces are primarily used in pacification. So this pacification marker signifies that the French do not control this space, but they can take pacification actions to try to take control of it. These flags in these spaces represent minority nationalities living there. So there's a Polish minority living in Poland, who would have guessed? Even though it's controlled by the Russians, it's a Polish minority nationality living there. That can have negative effects. And if, for instance, an independent minor power marker was placed there, that means that whatever flag is there controls that space. This would be the Poles control that space. The same is true if you take control of a neutral space. So if I took control of Romania, for example, the flag is still there, even if I would have a control marker there. The flag would still be there, and that still counts as controlling a minority nationality. Certain events revolve around minority nationalities, and the Austrians, most of their unique mechanics revolve around the fact that they're living in an empire, most of whom is not Austrian. Okay, so that's the basic overview of what is in the game. What are we looking at? What's the basic overview of what all the pieces mean? If I'm a player, what should I be looking at? In the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to play through a turn of the campaign scenario, starting in turn 1, with the bots, and I think you'll get a good feel of how the game flows, and more importantly, how easy it is to use the bot system for IE. Okay, I hope to see you there. Thanks for watching.